วัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีครับต้อนรับเข้าสู่ The Diplomat ทาง Spring News กับคุณมิกกี้ทันชนกจงยศยิ่งและผมวารินทร์สัจเจเดลนะครับวันนี้เรามาอยู่กันที่ชั้น 38 ของโรงแรม The Continent กรุงเทพมหานครนะครับในร้านที่มีชื่อว่า Access and Spin
ค่ะ
สวยไหมฮะ
สวยมากเลยนะคะสถานที่พิเศษมากแล้วก็แขกรับเชิญก็พิเศษเช่นเดียวกันค่ะ
ครับผมเพราะว่าแขกรับเชิญนะครับสถานทูตของท่านเนี่ยอยู่ไม่ไกลจากสถานที่แห่งนี้นะครับ
เรียกว่าเดินมาได้
นะฮะท่านอยู่ซอย 27 นะครับแล้วก็อยู่ใกล้กับโรงแรมนี้มากเลยนะครับวันนี้เนี่ยเราจะพูดคุยกับพนักท่านวิกเตอร์ รามิเรสท่านทูตคิวบาประจำประเทศไทยนะครับแต่ว่าเรื่องที่คุยเนี่ยนะครับจะมีผลกระทบกับประเทศไทยในทางอ้อม
ค่ะใช่ค่ะนั่นก็คือเรื่องของการรื้อฟื้นความสัมพันธ์ระหว่างสหรัฐอเมริกาและคิวบาที่ล่าสุดเนี่ยเป็นข่าวใหญ่โตเลยนะคะซึ่งเรื่องนี้พอฟื้นความสัมพันธ์แล้วประเทศไทยจะได้รับผลกระทบในแง่ดีหรือว่าในแง่เสียยังไงเนี่ยวันนี้เราจะมาติดตามกัน
ครับผมแต่ก่อนอื่นนะครับไปดูสิ่งที่เกิดขึ้นกันก่อนนะครับในสกู๊ปชิ้นนี้ที่มาที่ไปของการกลับมารื้อฟื้นความสัมพันธ์ระหว่างสหรัฐกับคิวบาในครั้งนี้ก่อนที่จะพบกับมุมมองของท่านทูตคิวบาประจำประเทศไทยครับ
วันนี้รายการ The Diplomat ขอนำเสนอเรื่องราวอันน่าสนใจของประเทศคิวบากันค่ะ วันที่ 17 ธันวาคมปีที่แล้วได้กลายเป็นนิมิตหมายแห่งประวัติศาสตร์ในความสัมพันธ์ที่เต็มไปด้วยมรสุมระหว่างคิวบากับสหรัฐในกว่าครึ่งศตวรรษที่ผ่านมาเมื่อประธานาธิบดีราอูล คาสโตรแห่งคิวบาและประธานาธิบดีบารัก โอบามาแห่งสหรัฐได้ประกาศฟื้นฟูความสัมพันธ์ทางการทูตของสองประเทศทั่วโลกจับตามองเรื่องนี้โดยเฉพาะวินาทีที่ผู้นำทั้งสองได้พบปะและจับมือกันเป็นครั้งแรกระหว่างการประชุมสุดยอดผู้นำอเมริกาที่กรุงปานามาซิตี้ประเทศปานามาเมื่อเดือนที่แล้วถือเป็นสัญลักษณ์สำคัญของความสัมพันธ์ทวิภาคีและเป็นการพบปะกันของผู้นำระดับสูงครั้งแรกนับตั้งแต่รองประธานาธิบดีริชาร์ด นิกสันของสหรัฐหารือกับนายฟิเดล คาสโตรเมื่อ 56 ปีก่อนประธานาธิบดีโอบามาของสหรัฐกล่าวหลังการหารือทวิภาคีกับนายคาสโตรว่าทั้งสองประเทศสามารถเดินหน้าไปสู่อนาคตด้วยกันโดยทิ้งความขัดแย้งในอดีตไว้เบื้องหลังพร้อมแสดงความเชื่อมั่นว่าทั้งสองประเทศสามารถพัฒนาความสัมพันธ์แบบใหม่ระหว่างกันได้ในขณะที่ประธานาธิบดีคาสโตรยืนยันว่าเขาจะเดินหน้ามาตรการต่างๆเพื่อพัฒนาความสัมพันธ์ระหว่างสองประเทศให้กลับมาอยู่ในระดับปกติ
So Ambassador, we took you out this time to a new venue. How do you like this place?
Well, it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. I work, that is my office is very close by, but and I pass by here very often, but never stepped into the place. So I'll have to do it in the future really often because it's wonderful.
At night, it's beautiful. The Bangkok skyline and.
If Spring News invite me, we'll do it next week itself.
Why not?
Otherwise, the ambassador of Cuba will invite Spring News in the evening.
We're more than happy to be with you anytime. Ambassador, this is our first interview for 2015. And before we get to the main interest of this interview, which is about the renewed US-Cuban relationships, let's talk about our bilateral relationships this year. What will be the highlight of 2015 Cuban-Thai relationships?
Well, the question is probably very well timed because we, although 4 months have passed already of the 2015, we are preparing the travel to Cuba of a very important delegation, very high-level delegation, to deepen the relationship that Cuba has established with Thailand in the field of high-tech pharmaceuticals. As I probably told you before, Cuba has made huge progress in this sphere to such a point that the big powers, you talked about the U.S., just now the U.S. have signed an agreement with the Cuban company because there was a visit to Cuba of a high-level delegation, the governor of New York, and sort of they came with this sort of headline. Turns out Cuba has had... Turns out Cuba's had a lung cancer vaccine for years, and we didn't know it.
We were in the dark.
So it's a field we have progressed a lot, and we can be of assistance to Thailand, and that way we will. This is the future.
Apart from pharmaceutical field, what else can we look for for our relations?
Well, I would say that the future is opening now with the because although we are not yet talking about a hot topic of today, which is Cuba-U.S. developments, but the blockade, economic blockade or embargo, as you probably know it, from the U.S. to Cuba somehow or the other harms everybody. Everybody who has the least thing to do with Cuba is harmed by that. So if that goes, things will be easier for everybody. And already and coincidentally with this development, which is very recent, there is a new foreign investment law in Cuba, and there is an economic zone that has been opened, and there is already a lot of people rushing to Cuba to take advantage of these changes of this situation, of this atmosphere from Europe and from the U.S. itself.
Harmed by the embargo, could you help us visualize, how it was like, when you said, like, even the countries that have least to do with Cuba are harmed by the embargo or affected, How was it like before?
You mean internal to Cuba or
both?
Outside?
Both, yeah.
Well, inside, you have to start from one point. It's not easy to face the mightiest power on earth, no matter whether you're small, medium size, or big guy.
And you're referring to the U.S.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
It's not easy. And allow me to read just one paragraph that will exemplify what it is, because it's very relevant. And this paragraph was read last week at the Summit of the Americas by my president in front of all the presidents of the Western Hemisphere, including the U.S. This is a memorandum of 1966 that defined the U.S. policy towards Cuba until today. It reads, the majority of Cubans support Castro. An effective political opposition does not exist. The only foreseeable means of alienating internal support to the government is through disenchantment, disaffection, based on economic hardships, to weaken the economic life of Cuba, denying it money, supplies, to decrease monetary and real wages in order to bring about hunger, desperation, and the overthrow of the government. End of quote. I gifted it to you by the way. So this has been the policy since then until today. You want me to prove until today? I just returned from Cuba a few weeks ago, and in January, after the December announcement by Obama and my president, there was the first round of talk in Havana by U.S. delegations and Cuba. And at the end of the talks, the head of the U.S. delegation said, our aim continues to be the same. Last two words.
Oh.
What has changed is the tactics.
Oh.
You know, no government can say so. Imagine that I say to you in front of the camera, as I should do, in your own soil, that I want to change the government of Thailand and that I will do whatever it takes. I'll pay money to people here. I'll pay you to make programs against the government. Imagine that I do this thing here. I mean, this lady didn't wait to go to Washington or keep it as a secret policy.
Roberta.
She just said on Cuban soil. So you can imagine how difficult it has been for us, not only to survive, but to progress in a number of fields, like the one we were talking before, and be recognized by majority of the countries of the world. The U.S. tried to isolate Cuba until today, and in the end, it ended up being isolated in regards to Cuba, as proven by the voting of a resolution in the UN, on which only one country, the Middle East, supports the U.S. Out of 190, the rest is with Cuba. But on the foreign front, it has had an extraterritorial effect. The U.S. government doesn't allow Cuba, even till today, to use the dollar in foreign transactions. If Thailand produces something that has more than 10% of Cuban raw materials, the U.S. will say, I will not buy.
Oh.
That is, if you produce rice and there is fertilizer used of Cuban origin, more than 10% of the total value of the thing, the U.S. will say, no one bit of rice from Thailand or cars.
So it's still like this today.
It is like this today.
Still.
It is still like this today. So you can imagine everybody trades with the U.S. in big amounts. It's the biggest trading partner for most of everybody. So everybody has to take into account those very stiff regulations, and I just mentioned two.
So, Ambassador, we heard enough already from America and from the Western media about what triggered the renewed relationships. But coming from you, what do you think has brought this renewed relationship? What took it so long, 50 years, and what triggered it from Cuban point of views?
Well, you see, one of the factors was the thing that I mentioned to you. The U.S. realized this had not worked, has not brought about that. It has brought about a lot of hardships. It's not easy.
But it didn't overthrow the government.
But it didn't overthrow the government. It created a lot of hardship for the people. It made us strong because we united to defend the cause that was ours. Nobody gifted us anything. Our independence, our survival from that, we attained on our own effort. So it didn't work, first of all. I think the present administration, and we have to acknowledge Obama for that.
Of course.
His courage, his foresight, realized this has not worked. Let's try something else. On the second hand, majority of Americans, according to surveys carried out in the U.S., were in favor of a change. Not few big names in companies,
of course,
were also in favor. In any case, the U.S. Was in Cuba for 61 years, right from our independence from Spain until 1959, and there was a very fluid relationship. The whole economy was in the hands of the U.S., so they know the country. This factor is also there. The majority of the Cubans in the U.S. were also in favor. Only a small clique of guys who have been living on the government's allocation of resources for that end, and that were making money on that. Only that group of recalcitrant right-wing extremists was not, but everybody in Congress, several times along the course of the last 10-15 years, there have been several attempts in Congress to pass resolutions, and some of them have got 200 something, 300 votes in favor, something that people don't know much about. So those are the factors, and the most important, perhaps, is Cuba's resistance. We didn't kneel down. We continued to be what we've been all through. We continued from the beginning of 90s until today, very much on our own. Nobody to say, here we are, if you are threatened, we'll be behind you. No one.
So there must be some interest for the U.S. then in this case, that they'll get out of this renewed relationships in that case.
Maybe because of the internal politics in the U.S.
In the US.
With the lowest rating of Obama administration.
Well, I would say that of Obama's period, this change with Cuba, which is a historical event in world political affairs. Well, politically, I would say the world, and particularly Latin America, was pressing very much the U.S. to let us be, because right or wrong, it is in no law in international affairs that I can change your system, whatever it is. It's not accepted in international law. As a matter of fact, Cuba had not participated in the Summit of the Americas, which just ended in Panama 2 weeks ago, because of American pressure, U.S. pressures on the rest of the
Latin American
of the,
countries.
continent. As a matter of fact, in 1962, that pressure brought about the breaking up of relations of all those countries except for Mexico with Cuba. And the process started to be reversed middle of the 70s. The Caribbean countries were the first to break it. And it came up to the point that last year, in the Summit of the Americas, a group of countries said, if Cuba is not present at the next one, will not be here.
So U.S. being pressured now.
So for the outsider, it seems like a sudden renewed relations, and maybe for some Cuban people too. So what are the reactions of all these announcements?
First of all, let me clarify something for the Thai audience and further than there, because when you read the news about Cuba and the U.S. and what's going on today in the world media, it seems that like everything is over. We have turned the page, and it's not like that. We have been working since December till today on the re-establishment of diplomatic relations and opening of embassies in Washington and Havana. That is very close there, but there have been certain issues, like in this last 2 weeks, the U.S. was keeping Cuba on a list of states sponsors of terrorism when there was no ground for that. They put us in that list only to justify the embargo on Cuba. This is our assessment, because there was no ground for it to such a point that they have just announced they will remove Cuba from that list. It was a pressure tactic or a tool, sorry.
From the internal politics, I believe.
Yes,
Yeah.
a lot to do with that. If you don't keep Cuba there and we don't have weapons of mass destruction, we don't have this, we don't have that, we don't have the other, how do you harass a country for 55 years altogether? As a matter of fact, we proposed the U.S. before that, many years before, to sign an agreement on terrorism. Cuba was one of the first countries which opened the airspace on 11 September for American planes to pass through us. As you know, we are right there in the middle between South and the U.S. or North
When
America.
they were
So
attacked
you
by
have
the
connection
terrorists.
all the
Yeah.
times.
We have been having talks. I mean, we didn't come to this point just out of nothing.
Overnight, no.
It's been kept a good secret by the U.S. and by Cuban negotiators and government and such. But we've been, for the last 2 years, talking to each other. First on migration issues and this and that. And then in the latest one and a half years, more completely on this situation of today. But normalization of relation, what you were asking, is going to take time. It's going to be a process that will start once we open our embassies, once we re-establish relations.
Yep.
Which is, reestablishment will be the easiest part. It's around the corner, I would say. But normalization is going to be hard because a number of things related to the blockade are law in the U.S. Are law in so many, even in the budget of some ministries,
Yeah.
there are Thai-Cuban regulations. So to undo that, it's Congress, not the president. Although the president of the U.S. has a lot of executive powers.
Yep.
That is what he has used in this case of Cuba. But to finish the embargo and blockade us is another matter. And then normalizing the relation, which includes the returning the naval base at Guantanamo to Cuba, because this is Cuban territory.
Guantanamo Bay.
Held Guantanamo.
Yeah.
It is one thing will be to close the torturing thing,
Yeah, the prison, yeah.
but the other thing is to return that
To Cuba.
piece of land to Cuba because it's Cuban territory.
Ambassador, so they're having an election in 2016, and already Republicans are threatening Obama about the deal with Iran over the nuclear agreement. Do you think the changes, which unforeseeable, we don't know now who will be in power for the next administration, will it affect the agreement reached? And since we're here in Thailand, what's the implications on a country like us, with this renewed relationships?
Well, you're very right in pointing out that what's going to happen at the next election in the U.S. might or might not influence developments
Yeah.
with Cuba.
Yeah.
We hope it doesn't, but it will depend very much who finally wins. And I think at this stage nobody knows
Nobody knows.
who is going to
Yeah.
win.
Yeah.
We expect that things will not change because it's good for them, it's good for us. And let's not think about the bad things or the worst, because as I said, it's a two-way traffic.
Yeah.
But there are some people in mostly in the Republican camp who have been quite hawkish towards Cuba. I hope also they are senseful enough, but let's see.
Let's see. Yeah.
But actually, I think in terms of people-to-people connection, it will still go on, because I see from the news that the American people, they prepare to visit your country too, and there will be the boom in tourism industry in Cuba.
Can we take some tea?
Sure.
Yes,
Please.
of course.
Yeah.
This is just to relax the atmosphere.
And you still haven't answered that the implications on our country as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, let me tell you that some things are happening on the ground already. We are talking on a number of areas already, like migration issues, the reestablishment of post relations between the U.S. and Cuba, which is important because they were broken also a few years back during Bush administration, and there is 1.5 million Cubans living in the U.S. That have families in Cuba. We have reestablished that. The air connections are being licenses are being discussed. We have signed an agreement with the first in years with the telecommunication company in the U.S. Recently. The governor of New York has just visited Cuba and signed an agreement with the Cuban company, biotechnology. There have been, even in the worst of time, an influx of Americans to Cuba through third countries. And we devise a way not to stamp their passport when they enter Cuba. So there have been, because the American tourist in Cuba, or visitor, let's say, in general, has not found a hostile country, a hostile population in Cuba. Cubans are very friendly, and they have treated them like that. We don't teach our children to hate America. We have never done that, because we also have friends in the US. We do teach our children what the history of the relations between the US and Cuba has been.
That's the fact.
So open, that's a fact. So open, and such a fact it is that it was said in Panama by my president to 34 presidents present there. Our history has been this and this and this and that. And Obama somehow or the other had to acknowledge that by saying our history, the history of our relation has been very complicated.
But Ambassador, there are also Americans of Cuban origin in Little Havana in Florida, who felt that their government, American government, betrayed them because they ran away from the regime, when they moved to America. And are there ways to mend the relationship, with these American Cubans living in America?
There have been a change in the perception of this group of the Cuban Americans in Florida, and the majority of them the vast majority of them have been for years now, and even much more now, in favor of that change. Because one way or the other, the blockade would also harm their families in Cuba. And it is not that the majority migrated with all the family, because most of us, we have either a cousin or an uncle or a mother or whatever.
Still in Cuba.
But it's still in Cuba.
Yeah.
So if the American screws are tight and it affects the population more than the government itself, then people realize with the passing of time. And the most recalcitrant of the emigrants were the ones who migrated at the beginning, which were a political migration. The ones who came after the 70s, let's say, were more like from anywhere, looking for a better life, better lives, opportunities. In any case, that's what the U.S. say. This is the land of opportunities, and anybody can become a millionaire. So that's what many Cubans went there for, and it's not any secret, because the surveys have been conducted there. So the majority are in favor. It's a small minority, and especially the right-wing extremist leaders who have been cashing on the flow of funds from the government for subversive actions in Cuba.
So final question then would be the implications on our country, Thailand, after this opening up of the...
It will have a positive implication
on Thailand,
on everybody, including Thailand.
Yeah.
Because one's situation, is not any operation that is carried out between Thailand and Cuba has to go through the hardships of the blockade, the economic blockade. Because suppose we have to make a payment, you export rice to me, or household equipment that we buy from Thailand. Now you tell me, okay, place the $1 million you owe me in the Bank of Bangkok Bank. Most banks in the world somehow or the other have a relationship with the U.S. Because the U.S. still controls the finances, the banking system of the world. And once that is the situation, then for Cuba it's not easy to transfer the money to Bahrain in Thailand. We have to find ways, and usually, since that is the situation, you overcharge me because there is a risk involved. That's what's happening. Also, for all these years, Cuba has to pay for a cup of tea more than what another country, Bangladesh, let's say, pays to Thailand. So once this cloud goes, people will feel more at ease. We will trade normally. You cannot trade normally with Cuba under the embargo regulations. People do. Cuba trade with 100 and something countries of the world, but it's difficult. In many countries, the Cuban ambassador cannot use a credit card, have to pay in cash because of the embargo, and you don't know it.
ดูแล้วน่าจะเป็นข่าวดี
ค่ะ
สำหรับประเทศไทยมากกว่านะครับสำหรับการกระชับความสัมพันธ์ การรื้อฟื้นความสัมพันธ์ของสหรัฐกับคิวบาในครั้งนี้ เพราะว่าการทำธุรกรรม การค้าการลงทุนระหว่างไทยกับคิวบานั้นน่าจะสะดวกและง่ายมากยิ่งขึ้น
ค่ะ แต่อย่างที่ท่านทูตวิกเตอร์บอกนะคะว่าทั้งหมดทั้งมวลเนี่ยในการที่จะรื้อฟื้นความสัมพันธ์ มันต้องใช้เวลานานเลยทีเดียวนะคะเพราะว่าต้องมีการเจรจากันหลายเรื่องให้ชัดเจนกว่านี้ด้วยค่ะ
และก็เกี่ยวข้องกับกฎหมายหลาย ๆ
ค่ะ
อย่างของสหรัฐด้วยนะครับ
ใช่ค่ะ
ซึ่งต้องจับตามองการเมืองสหรัฐที่อาจจะส่งผลกระทบต่อข้อตกลงในครั้งนี้ด้วย เพราะว่ากำลังจะมีการเลือกตั้งประธานาธิบดีในปีคศ 2016 ถ้าเปลี่ยนขั้วการเมืองเนี่ยจะกระทบ
ค่ะ
กับสิ่งที่ตกลงกันไว้หรือเปล่านะครับต้องติดตามกันให้ได้ รายการแต่ Diplomat จะนำเสนอเรื่องราวแบบนี้เรื่อย ๆ นะครับวันนี้ต้องขอบพระคุณสถานที่ถ่ายทำรายการในวันนี้ครับชั้น 38 ร้าน Axis and Spin ของโรงแรม The Continent กรุงเทพมหานครใกล้แยกอโศกครับ
ค่ะ วันนี้นะคะเราสองคนคุณวารินทร์ สัจเดลและดิฉันทันชนก จงยศยิ่งลาไปก่อนสวัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีครับ